Hey, folks, you're listening to the Wait What If podcast. I'm very, very excited you're here. I'm very excited. You have no idea. I'm so happy that you are checking out my program because I work on this. I put it together. I spit wisdom. I wax philosophically for the world to grow. Tonight, Chris Denson. He's an American innovation expert, marketer, and comedian. He's the host of the Innovation Crush podcast and runs an innovations team at Sorry, Chris. I've done like 2 takes of this, and I'm sticking with this one. Omnicom Group. Man, that's your fault. I think you say that during the podcast. That's your fault. So Chris came on. We had some cool discussions. We talked about martial arts, stand-up comedy, writing, innovation, technology, millennials, and I don't know. We had a good talk. Chris is a great guest. Check out his podcast again. It's Innovation Crush. And without further ado, Chris Denson.
You're listening to the Wait What If podcast.
We're about to blow stuff up.
Let's start here in mentioning that Chris was an engineer, but started his career in comedy. He actually had a unlikely beginning to his comedy career.
I was a 17-year-old kid who was away from home for the first time going to college.
Okay.
And it was like, I always had it's just a quiet obsession with comedy in general. Like all the sitcoms, stand-up, I watched a ton of. And, Cedric the Entertainer was coming to town. And they were like, hey, we're looking for a couple of opening acts to open for Cedric. And I'm like, maybe now's my chance. So unlike you, I don't know if you did this or not, but I was so nervous beforehand that I just spent a lot of time writing material. I did a few jokes just for the audition. And then once I got the call, it said, yes, we want you to do it. I was like, uh-oh. So as opposed to winging it and I'm a funny guy.
Yeah.
I just maybe overly prepared. I mean, I did okay, but definitely was like writing stuff, recording it into a little tape recorder, letting friends listen to it, going to do open mics and so on and so forth. So, and luckily the first time was not like a horrible time. There were definitely horrible times like after that.
Yeah.
And there continue to be, but it was just kind of like a good foundational groundwork for that kind of thing.
Sure. And it worked out well for you because you ended up on, USA, right?
Mm-hmm. I won a few comedy competitions. At one point, I forget what the name of the tour was, but the prize was we got flown to New York to perform at Radio City Music Hall and be on Gilbert Gottfried's Up All Night.
Okay.
So
yeah.
So that was actually pretty cool. And so just kind of kept at it. So I had a television appearance, and then kind of like just made a shift from stand-up like purely to more comedy writing in general. Writing, so the difference for me with stand-up was a couple of things. One was, and to this day, I'm not really a big fan of repetition. Like I watch a movie or I watch a stand-up special like multiple times, but to do the same material over and over again, like night after night, show after show, and then go on the road and kind of still do the sort of, even if you have a good 45, 60 minutes, it's still sort of like, I got to deliver this again. And for me, writing was it was just so free.
Yeah.
It's one and done. I mean, writing is rewriting. There's definitely a process to it where you're like, once it goes from your mind to a piece of paper, then you're like, that doesn't make sense. Then you change that. Then it goes from the paper to a producer or an actor who's actually delivering the content. Then you're like, okay, that didn't work. And then you rewrite it again. And so there's just this constant flow of change, but you can easily move on to the next funny idea. And I think the way my mind thinks is really like in a lot of extrapolation. Like I'll start with a concept and then it's like, and then we can do this. And then this happens. And then the person that like whatever the sort of developmental path it takes, it's a little bit more free for me. And yes, it's also the ridicule is still the same. Like if you
Yeah.
if you fail on stage, I think a comedy writing room is definitely like they'll let you have it, right? It's, it's like if you come whack, they'll have a good time letting you know that it doesn't work.
Chris gives us his ideas on what drives the creative mind and what his creative process entails.
I mean, I have, like yourself, like hundreds of ideas floating around, and I have like bits and pieces of concepts here and there, and sometimes I'll get reminded of them, sometimes I'll forget, sometimes I'll write bits and pieces down, like just in notes or in a notebook. But once I actually sit down and go like, all right, I'm going to focus on this particular concept, like it is such a free flowing process, and I can be in a horrible mood. It can be early in the morning. I don't do well late at night, I will say that. But I'll get up at like 4:00, sometimes, and just to like get something out of my head. And I think the free flowing process is like, you're not really like whatever framework you start with, you just start filling it. It's almost like an abstract painting, right? Where you start in one direction and then something else happens. I have a friend who's a really amazing artist, and he drew this amazing painting, and his like 8, or maybe I think she was 6 at the time, got a hold of it and like added to it.
But
it's part of the story, right? It's just part of the whole like genesis and flow of it. Like he found a way to make it work. Yes, upset at first, but just like that idea of being in flow is pretty it's pretty intense. But it's it's kind of like you said, there's a bunch of different bits and pieces or separate ideas kind of floating around, and once you actually sit down to concentrate on one, you're like, you may even surprise yourself. At least I find that sometimes.
Sure. I find it keeps me busy, and I'll explain why. It's because, so if I come up with an idea, nothing irritates me more than people that have ideas and they tell you about their ideas, but they never get anything done. They don't do anything. And when I was younger, I made a point to not be one of those people. The problem with that is whenever I get an idea and I want to share it, it has to be something I'm going to do. So, like with my wife, I'm constantly saying, hey, do you know what? I want to do this project. And she's like, oh my God, another project, or I want to do this. I want to work on this. I want to get, and I like, again, I don't like to not do it. This podcast, perfect example. 4 years ago, I'm like, do you know what? I want to do a podcast. And now it's, if it's time to do a show, I got to do a show. I'm not going to not do it.
Right.
But it can get tiring. But you know what? What's the alternative? Go and watch TV and sit and just not exist. So
I've also adopted this philosophy where it's done is better than perfect, right? And I have a lot of one sheets completed so that I could at least, if there's an idea, there's one thing I wrote up maybe a year and a half ago, and an opportunity just came for it because I was like, it was in my head. It was a strong enough thing that I always look for what I call a goosebump moment, because I think out of all those ideas that are kind of floating around in your head or in your heart, it's like there's only a handful of those that are actually like the OMG, the things that give you goosebumps that kind of get you excited enough to take a step.
Right.
Is it the right step? Who knows, right? But getting something formal together, even if it's just a one-page document, or a mock-up, or if you're in the startup ecosystem, like some form of MVP, or this is how it could work, like whatever the piece of however you need to communicate that idea, and I don't think it needs to. I think you have to give yourself some wiggle room to let it evolve on its own. And so this thing that I was working on like a year and a half ago with a couple of partners, are like I was the one who made the call to this company. I was like, hey, maybe if we partner together to do X, Y, and Z. They liked it enough, and so I kind of put myself in a position, sometimes deliberately, where I can't turn back. Right, like once you got your equipment and once you started that first show, you're like, well, I got to keep going now.
Right.
Right. So, and it's never done. It's never like, okay, this is exactly the way I want it. And so at least in that early developmental part of the development process.
Chris's creativity led him to develop his unique brainchild, Innovation Crush. It's not just a successful podcast, but a standalone philosophy.
Yeah, so that is my brainchild. I was actually hosting a pure comedy show, like almost like morning radio kind of banter.
Okay.
A friend of mine, and then there was a guy who went to go work for that I knew who went to go work for Levity Entertainment Group, which is they manage a ton of comedic talent. They had just started a podcast network to help promote their comedic talent, which ranged from Jeff Dunham to Tommy Chong to a number of different individuals. So. They were like, hey, we've done really well with comedy. We're starting to think about testing other formats. And what would you think about a show about marketing, which is kind of like through evolution, kind of where my career headed. And I go, well, once you do 2 shows about marketing, I think you've kind of talked about everything you can talk about.
Right.
But for me, I said, if you think of something that's like, where do smart marketers go for really good inspiration and cultural insight and to really good examples of people who are doing cool stuff that they can pull from or, at least learn from. And for me, that's Fast Company. And, to this day, this is, 4.5 years later, I still say the show is a cross between Fast Company and The Daily Show. So I was like, well, if I do a show, I want there to be some entertainment value and not just like an NPR tune in for today's politics. But if you spoon feed me a message while I'm having a good time listening, like it's a double whammy.
Yeah.
So that's the one I set out to do. I don't know if I always get there, but but at least the attempts are made.
Right. In case Chris wasn't busy enough, he also wrote a book called Crushing the Box, 10 Essential Rules for Breaking Essential Rules.
No, so yeah, we just launched a book a couple of months ago, which hit #1 on Amazon, and that was kind of rooted in the show. So a lot of anecdotes, organize it into 10 principles for making innovation happen, both from a tactical standpoint, as well as like a little bit of personal development, like the grit it takes, like you talked about, the difficulties of stand-up. I think it's the same thing for an innovator who has an idea and is up on a stage by himself, pitching his heart out and trying to make you think that his concepts or her concepts are the best ever, and you should give money and attention and time and all that stuff to it. And then, so kind of just got the itch to put the book together. So each principle is kind of rooted in an anecdote from the show, whether maybe a guest story or something like that. And then I kind of add in my own experience as far as whether a concept like empathy, which is sort of the ethos of chapter 1. It's a lot more difficult than it sounds.
Sure.
But it's also, and if you have your wits about you, you can have a good time despite that.
Could this business model have existed 20 years ago?
I think it's always existed in some way, shape, or form. I think, I think the rate at which we innovate and who's doing it, it's not safeguarded by a select few. Because of what the internet has allowed us to do and what iPhones or Samsung Galaxies have allowed us to do, or just and discover and be inspired by and want to create. I mean, you look at the rate of startup, funding and literally starting the companies. It's a lot more accelerated than it was previously.
Sure.
So I don't know if it would have. I mean, look, I can tell you a few years ago, like when I left a company called Machinima and started just kind of like doing a little bit of a roadshow of myself and like meeting with companies and just saying, here's, and I was believing in this this idea of companies need an innovation practice, right? And this is also in the book. It's like most of the people I met with was like, oh, so you're a creative director. They're like, no, yes, but no, right? Oh, you're the tech guy. Yeah, but no, like it's so much, it's just a different perspective on what it means. So like the definition kind of varies, and even to this day it's still vague for some people, right? But so as a pure business model in and of itself, probably not, but as a practice, I feel like it's always been around.
We discuss the marriage of creativity and technology and how it has created a boom in creative entrepreneurship. I
kind of will turn to one of my guests, Orlando Jones, who's a comedic actor and also just an amazing entrepreneur. and just in tech and tools, and he's like such a huge geek. But he said something that you almost made me reframe it, which was, he said, we all started off as fans of something. We all saw something and we said, I want to do that. And so, 20 years ago, right, it's like, oh, I see stand-up comedy. I want to do that, right? Now, because of what the internet is, you discover things every single day that you're like, that is cool. I want to find a way to do. So there's even been studies about millennials. There's a guy interviewed named Peter Voogd, who's sort of like a millennial whisperer. So people go to him for their expertise on the generation and so on and so forth. And he's like, one of the biggest hurdles for the generation is paralyzation by choice, right? There's so many things you are interested in and want to do and want to like touch on that you don't make any decision, right? Or you delay or the other darker side of it is like you assume you're an expert in something because you did read a couple of articles and I'm a social media expert because I have a Twitter account and I read 3 articles, right? Like, because the information's there and the air of feeling informed and knowledgeable is different, but it's also, different than being experienced.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I think we are undervaluing the idea of experience. Everything's a shiny object, right? Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting mix of possibility and impossibility.
You couple that with being a young adult that knows everything anyways, and
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't have this stuff, and I thought I knew what I was doing.
Oh, sure.
Right? Let alone if matter of fact, I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I have to be careful about telling her to Google stuff. Right, like if she asks me a question, I have to be careful of, and even my son, I have a 5-year-old, but he can't read yet. So,
okay, yeah,
but it's like if the more I tell her to go Google something, it's like, oh, I'll just go and find out and inform myself, right? Mm-hmm. As opposed to kind of evolution through dialogue with people, and I think, I'm sure you know this as a host. It's like you get a lot out of these people you talk to, right? Mm-hmm. Let alone what you've read online or discovered in a magazine or whatever you saw on Twitter or Instagram. And it's like these conversations are like enlightening. And so I think it's just being careful that we don't over rely on this false sense of expertise because of every piece of information is at your fingertips.
We changed gears here a bit to discuss the age of the millennial and how they evolved from being tech-obsessed tweens to the driving force in markets, politics, and entertainment, and how their culture is slowly becoming our culture. We go from Chicago's musician Young Chop to Colonel Sanders. Kind of go down a rabbit hole here.
Let's be real. The millennials are finally sort of age, right? So we do. I think we are starting. I think there's millennials and then there's millennial minded. I think I kind of refer to myself as millennial minded. Like I do participate and have the same sort of thing. But I think growing up just changes things. So a lot of times our brands were like, millennials do this. Millennials don't. They don't want to own cars and they don't want to own homes. Like everything's a shared economy. And I was like, until you get married and have a family. Right. Then right. You're going to need your own vehicle and you're going to want to be in a place where you have to be your kid has to be at a school. And, I think there's life stages. And I think we have a lot more in common life stage wise than we acknowledge. So,
I like that idea of millennial minded. Basically, you're saying that you can think and understand where they're coming from. Versus,
and even exhibit some of the same behaviors, right? I think some of the things that we talk about, like I live in a coastal city, like in LA, right? And so, when we talk to like LA and New York talk to each other about, we talk to ourselves even about VR and augmented reality, like all these things, and the future is taking over. I mean, I still know people who haven't heard of Uber or haven't used it, or I spoke about innovation at a conference recently, and it was in Austin, Texas, and it was for the Americans for the Arts. So you had like mom and pop arts and dance institutions, but you also had like museums and like really high-end institutions. And I asked the audience, which is about 1,200 people, I said, how many people here have done a VR experience? 3 people raised their hands.
Wow.
And this was November 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So, not too long, too long ago, but think about, at least in my world, how often the acronyms VR and AR come up.
Sure.
It's like, so I think we forget about these common denominators, right? The middle of America or even other parts of the world where, they're not doing the things that we assume that they are, at least to the extent.
Yeah, I haven't really thought of it that way. I just look at it as having to function in this new world. That's how I got my dad to be into iPads and FaceTime and all that. I said, look, you're 70, you can not FaceTime with your grandkids because they still live up in New Hampshire and interact in this world, or you can just let it happen, just learn about it, be excited about it, and now now he does everything. I'm getting tweets from my
right.
My dad.
Exactly.
Like, whoops, too far.
And then look, you've got the generational gap, right? I think if you're, I won't say an early adapter in the case of like our parents, but I will say like an easy adapter, which that should be a study done on with the AARP.
Sure.
Call the AARP now. But no, it's my mom is the complete opposite. Like I posted a video of my daughter doing like a karate. This is, she must have been like 6 at the time, doing, martial arts belt test. And I posted it on YouTube and I sent my mom the link, and about, 3 weeks later, she sent me an email back and said, hey, hi, son, I'm having trouble downloading the YouTube. And I was like, you just click the link.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do. It's literally one motion. And she didn't get it. And I got her a Kindle. I don't know why I did that. Like a few years later, and just yesterday I was talking to her, and she was like, oh, I got to take the Kindle and this iPad I got to the Apple Store. And I was like, well, they're not going to do anything with the Kindle.
Yeah.
Apple Store.
I wonder if there's a malleability in the brain that kind of solidifies after the age of 50 or 60 that just says, no, I'm not, this is the world that I have been formed in, and I can't go back.
Just, like, go to an old person's house, like see who has a rotary phone or a flip phone, or I'm even getting there. Like there's some things I'm just like, nah, I'm not doing that. Like I understand it and I appreciate it, but like Snapchat, for instance. Right?
I'm not doing that. That's not. Yeah, I don't even know if I have an account. I might. If there's a Wait What If account, I have no idea, but I've never posted to it. Because
exactly.
There was a comic we saw this weekend. Have you ever been down to Charlie Goodnight's in North Carolina?
No,
it's great little club. But he was saying something, but he's like, I don't even know what the kids are doing nowadays. Disappearing dick pics or something like that. And I realized he was talking about Snapchat. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, let alone you got stuff like Finstagram, just like the social construct of creating fake accounts so your parents don't know what you're really up to. There's ones called House Party. I mean, once you start getting to like Gen Z behavior, you're like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, was it? I forget the name of it. It's it's not like, it's like YouTube, but it's like Me Too, something like that. But see, I'm old. But you start to find like, look, there's millions of people using these platforms, and you haven't even heard of it, let alone like signed up with an account you don't use.
Sure.
So
it takes work too, and it took me. I got like 5,000 Twitter followers. You know how long it took me to get that? Worked my ass off. I don't want to start from scratch.
Exactly. A follower a month.
Yeah. Right. I think too, technology has a way of fitting like a sock. Like it's very easy to just kind of slide into it. It's not like you're getting a DOS prompt, 40 years ago and having to put your own code in or anything. They make it very user friendly, and I think that's important. For a couple of reasons. I think when I was emailing you, I told you about how, as a white guy from New Hampshire, I shouldn't know who Young Chop is out of Chicago. And because these kids, so I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a producer. And he's young. Well, now he's probably 25, 26. But, at one point he was 16, 17, and he was creating music out of his bedroom, and it was keeping him out of trouble. And he had the technology to put this music out there either on YouTube or whatever platform that ended up getting a massive, massive following. And that following grew not because some guy said, hey, Mr. Young Chop, if we do this beat with this, we can, generate revenue through the... No, it was because this is his music and this is what he does, and it resonated with a group of people. And then because technology is in such a way that here I am in at the time, I don't know, I forget when that came out. If for the listeners, it's if you watch Noisy, which is a subdivision of Vice News, they have a like a 7 or 8 part series on Atlanta, and then one on Chicago, which is called Chirac. So if you look up Noisy Chirac or Noisy Atlanta, I was glued to it. I was so fascinated because it took me out of my, I'm walking down the street, someone comes by blasting some music out of their window, and I don't know what that music is, and I don't care to know what it is, to oh, this is what that music is. This is what they're trying to say. This is the life that these kids have. And it completely opened my world. And it did so in a way that would not have been able to be done except for the advancements in technology and the ability, the accessibility.
I mean, I like to think that, the struggle has always remained the same, right? It's just the means by which you can be discovered and get your ideas, creative or business or otherwise, out to the world. I talk about, Colonel Sanders, who was in his 60s when he started shopping his chicken recipe, and he was literally going like door to door, like, taste my chicken.
Oh, really?
Would now get you arrested.
Yeah.
But,
right.
Just the phrase alone. Or, a guest of mine who's this guy named Hakeem Oluseyi, who's the chief science officer for the Discovery Channel. You mentioned like a kid wanting to get out of trouble. I think he's maybe got us by a couple of years in age. But, he grew up in like bad neighborhoods, and, he was a nerd at heart, just like Young Chop was a musicphile, at the time. And he's like, I would watch specials on TV about Albert Einstein, and he's like, I was also watching Fat Albert. So you've got this, you've got the same desire to do something bigger, better, different, stay out of trouble, whatever the catalyst is, and then you've got the means that have evolved by which to do that. I love like the fact that I get to talk to all these amazing people and also like put it into practice. There was a guy that I interviewed who also wrote a book on piracy. Mm-hmm. And just in one example, he just talks about like in the music business alone, first Warner Brothers introducing the phonograph, and then there were bands who were afraid to have their records recorded because they thought that they would be less relevant because the performing was that's how they made money. So you go from night to night to venue, and that's how you make money. If somebody just has it recorded, they can play it on their own. They won't need us. Yeah. Right. But look what recording did for, for the music industry and for musicians. So there's always like this threshold of fear and change. I know I'm going off on a complete tangent here.
No. It's interesting.
But I think as far as, whether it's a Young Chop or, Benny Goodman, the desire was there at a point in time. And, the work ethic that it takes is still instilled. It's just the work is just different.
Sure.
So
Chris gives us his opinion on the future of innovation and creativity and where he thinks we're going as a society in the next few decades.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is I've had this phrase and just sort of in the back of my head. I don't think I've ever even said it out loud, but it's like, I wonder if one day we'll say, remember the iPhone? Like whatever that means of communication is at that point, like whatever, we think the iPhone is impossible, right? Or as was Alexander Graham Bell's invention.
Yeah.
Like, what? You can do what?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's always a pleasant surprise. I think if anything, it's just, I like to make sure there's always a focus on the humanity of it all, mm-hmm. right? Like why are we creating this, And so as opposed to what can we do? And I think we've hopefully from an inventor standpoint, we've learned a lot about the downside, right? I mean, you talk about technology and social media. It's also been linked to depression and suicides and bullying and, all sorts of, or just bad body posture or exposure to radiation or suicides at the iPhone factory. Like there's all sorts of things. So it's like, I would hope that we take a little bit more of a mindful approach to the things that we invent, and so that we can have a list of boxes to check. Like, is it, does it actually help us? Because I think we assumed a lot of things like, oh, this is going to be great. And it has been amazing in so many different ways. But it's also been look at the election, it's just, it's like, as awesome as Facebook is, and keeping in touch with people and keeping up with family and remembering people's birthdays and being a person and a human being, it's also like, we became susceptible to a lot of bad things.
How is it as a father of a teenager? My daughter's only 3, so I got who knows what I'm going to have to deal with it when she turns.
Lock her
13.
up, man. Just lock her
up.
Just put her
I know, right? But
have you ever seen the movie Powder?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking back in the 90s when I was in high school, it was hard enough, trying to fit in, trying to be, it's the worst part of being a human being is that age between 14 and 18. Well, probably beyond that, but 14 to 18, where you're just, you're all messed up. And now,
right.
I mean, so not only do our kids have to fit in at school, but now they come home and they have to fit in the cyber world.
Yeah. It's, I try to, with both my kids, it's I just try to reinforce EQ, right? Like your emotional quotient. Like, how in tune are you with who you are and what's happening not in the world, like from world politics standpoint, but just like how people operate. Like, what's your mindset? Because I think, kind of a theme here is just sort of, the idea that the means have changed, but the problems have stayed the same. Like you said, you were awkward at a time when even your parents were like, "Oh my gosh, this radio," or whatever your parents were worried about. It's the same thing for, kids. I think the biggest hurdle though is just staying up to speed. Like, I'm on the board of an all-girls STEM school. And, and here's a school where it's science, technology, engineering, and math. And it's, it's the first all-girls public school in the state of California. And it's the first public STEM school. And there's 2 big gaps I see. One is the parents don't really know what the kids are learning, right? Because we didn't grow up learning about STEM. Like, we learned it, but we didn't learn it as a practice.
Right.
And then 2, like the way we connect and communicate, it's like, I was like, oh, did you know, I told one of the parents, like, there's a monitoring device that you can put on your kid's phone, where you can see every message they send and, which apps they opened. And I can't tell you how many people who said no to that, right? Like, just not knowing that there bits and pieces out there that can help you do a better job at parenting without interfering regular, you know what I mean? In a way that's like, I need to go through your phone. Right. So, so I think that's where, and on top of that, yes, the whole social angst, I think the same thing. My daughter was worried about her hair. She doesn't have any social media. So, and she doesn't have a device.
That's good. That solves that problem.
Well, one of my things was like, I want to make sure you understand how to connect with people face to face and look them in the eye before you, learn, get in the habit of doing it remotely. So, and it's like, really at the end of the day, does a 12 or 13-year-old need a phone? No, it's a convenience in a lot of ways. And sure, she has to call me from the school office sometimes, but that's what I had to do. So,
yeah, that's right.
A phrase I use as a parent is, sometimes we forget, or sometimes we try so hard to give our kids what we didn't have that we forget to give them what we did have. It's not my quote, but it's just something I heard.
Yeah, that's great.
And it is like, you know what? Yeah, go to the office. Like, learn to ask permission and for help at the same time. So during this interview, it's quite obvious that Chris is a great communicator, whether in the written format or verbal. He shares with us a key factor which has helped him master this skill. The one thing I try to do is put framing things up in a context where people are familiar with. right? So even if it's like on the surface, it's an out there thing. Even in the first chapter of the book, it's like one of my favorite interviews is this guy named Dan Goods, who I keep saying guy, I keep referencing guys. There's some women that have been on the show too. And some minorities. I'm inclusive. No, but he's NASA's artist in residence. His title is visual strategist, and he's been there for 15 years, and he helps turn their scientific concepts into art exhibitions. And, for the average listeners, like, that is crazy, right? Like, even for me to this day, even having known him for a few years, I'm still like super impressed. Like, I fan out at his stuff. But then during that conversation, I go, I said, the thing that you probably don't realize about yourself is that you're a marketer. All you're doing is translating, a concept into something that's a little bit more widely, recognized and inviting. So, because if you listen to an engineer talk gobbledygook, you're like, okay, what? And then if I show you, an art exhibit that uses sound and you can participate in it, and you're like, oh, that's what the speed of sound means. It's the same thing if you like. Principal Financial Group is one of my clients at OMD. It's like I have to translate into something that's a little bit more mainstream, so that people go like, "Oh, that's what that is. Now I want to sign up for it." And it happens like across so many different industries. So I think when you say like there's an obesity problem and there's a problem with the overuse of technology and there's problems, like it's all sort of being attentive to. In the case of parenting, is like how you what you're paying attention to as a parent. There's a lot that you have to like be mindful of, and it's easy to slip and go like, I hate when, and I don't use the word hate a lot, but like, you go to a restaurant and somebody hands their kid the iPad. They're not involved in the conversation. They're not, they are learning to like be distracted. And that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but
it's hard. And then you get kind of stuck in the same thing. Like you sit down in the John for 10 minutes and you're like, well, I need to read something. I need something.
Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm guilty as charged.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, right before we got on this call, I frequented the old restroom there. And
the restroom office. My wife's like, why do you take 35 minutes? I'm like, do you hear the kids?
Oh, my God. Yeah, I had that very conversation. It was like, you should have a time limit on how long you're in the bathroom. I was like, what do you mean?
That's so funny. Okay, so we know Chris is a comedian, but he's also a martial artist. And being a martial artist myself, we have to go down the martial arts rabbit hole. Specifically, I was asking him about the similarities between standing up in a fight or standing up on stage and delivering comedy.
Well, I think the most common part of it is punch lines.
Wow. Stick with the martial arts.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
No,
I
mean, similar in what regard? Just as general practices? Or?
Yeah, generally. Do you see, because I personally, I see a lot of similarities between the two. If someone tells me they're a black belt in Goju-Ryu karate and they do stand up, I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely. I see that would be the case.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. It's they're both individual sports, right? There's karate teams, but you're not all like on a court fighting.
Right. That would be awesome, though.
Yeah, it would. I think we just invented a new sport, karate. Yeah. Shaolin Soccer is a great movie.
That'd be awesome.
Which is a real movie, by the way. So, they're both individual sports. They're both things you really need to hone your craft at if you want to be good. I think there's stages of development in comedy, and I don't mean from a content perspective. I mean from just like your personal development as an individual. You set the tone with this is like, can you stomach a punch, right?
Sure.
Like, can you breathe your way through, a moment? I'll tell you a story at another point in time, but I got kicked in the stomach during a fight, and then when we had to go to our corners, and I saved face the whole time we were still standing, and then I got to the side, I was like, oh,
yeah.
Which that happens on the stage, right? It's
oh God, yeah,
brutally awful, but I survived it, right? So There's so many different things, and I think the idea of being in flow. I think when you are hot on a stage, it's just like you can do no wrong. And I think same thing is whether you're in kata or you're just meditating or you're actually doing something a little bit more aggressive, there's a flow to it. I mean, these tournaments that I used to participate in, it's like brackets, but it's not like a, Sweet 16 bracket where you get to do it over the course of a couple of months. It's like, no, one day, if there's 32 people who signed up for this tournament, like if you win, you stick around and fight again.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think there's something to be said of just about like endurance and all these different, like so many different similarities. And I'm glad that you bring it up because both of those things come up in the book, especially for the journey of an innovator. It's the same thing. Like this and I think therein lies just sort of my thesis on these similarities and like putting constructs in different envelopes or different veils, mm-hmm. so you could learn to look at them differently. And luckily, I've had this meandering life path where it's like, later as I got older, I was like, it's all the same.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You can't. One of my big things is you can't fake it. There's so many people out there that can kind of bullshit their way through a lot of stuff. I mean, even there's some forms of karate where you pay and I guess you'll get your black belt. But when you go into competition, and I'll guess we'll say comedy versus, competitive martial arts, you can't fake it, because if you do, you're going to suffer. You have to put the prep work in. You have to put the dedication in. Otherwise, it's just, it's a bloodbath, literally.
Yeah, it's no, something to be said about the 10,000 hour rule, right? It's like
that's right.
A lot of people dabble. I mean, look, I had my best friend. He was in my my wedding. I've known him since I was in sixth grade, and I started doing martial arts in college. And I was like, hey, you want to come like work? By this time, I'd been doing it for maybe a year or two, and we were sparring. And one of the first things you learn, at least in the style that I learned, is like control, right? The first thing you learn is control. Like you don't punch at full speed or kick at full speed, and you learn how to pull back, and you learn when to be a little bit more aggressive. And I was like, hey, slow down. I just gave him a couple of warnings, and he would tell you the story to this day. Shout out to Floyd Burton. So he was like, he kept like feeling himself, I guess, to put it lightly. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, don't kick me that hard again. And then he did it, and I forgot what I did like a spinning hook kick and floored him. And I was like, okay, now do you get the lesson?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
So, but that's where the dabbler goes. I know everything. And this is exactly what we talked about with generational access to information and expertise. It's like, I know enough.
Yeah.
Right? I can defend myself. I can go on stage, but you can't. You're not.
That's right.
You're by no means ready.
I went to probably my first. I mean, we saw Joe Rogan a couple months ago, but that was entertaining. We went to this local show just a couple nights ago. First time I'd been to a local comedy club in, gosh, it must have been 15 years, probably since the last time I performed. And the smell of the place, the look of the place, I was like, oh my God. It was like heroin calling at me.
It's a high. Yeah.
I came back home and I took out my comedy books. I still have them up in the attic, and looking at my old jokes, and I started writing again. I haven't written comedy. I've written a lot of science and medical stuff for my blog, but I haven't written comedy forever. And I forgot how enjoyable it is, like how taking a concept and cutting it up and trying to figure out which angle you can come in from and then working out. So I might go back up on the stage. We'll see.
I don't think it's a might. I think you just do it. So
I'm an old man now, though. I'm not.
Didn't I just tell you about Colonel Sanders?
Oh yeah, that's right.
And shop those chicken recipes.
That's right.
No, I started writing material again too because I haven't performed. Like luckily I get to be silly on my show, but it's not stand up, right? And I think I have a newfound relationship with it, I guess, as I got older, or like kind of coming full circle. And I have a whole bunch of notes in my thing, and one of my I haven't performed yet. I tried to go to an open mic night, and it was like I felt like a ghost because they were like, oh, you're here for that? We haven't done that in 4 years.
Oh,
I was like,
no,
then why
yeah.
is it on your website?
Yeah.
But it was, I wanted to, what was I saying? Because I travel a lot, I was like, oh, I can go to some city. If I go to Chicago, not Chicago, that's too big of a stand-up town. But if I,
Oh, yeah, that's...
if I go to some city, I can go like, hey, is there an open mic night happening nearby? So part of for me, the personal risk is like the recognition and failing in front of people you know.
Right.
I don't mind failing in front of you if I have no idea who you are.
Exactly.
But if like your friends and family show up and you're like, ooh, that was bad, man. You okay?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I don't need that.
I made that mistake growing up. I was like, hey, you should come out to my open mic show. And then my friends would come out and I'd just eat a dick. And I'm like, well, and it's rough. And then your friends think you're not funny and you're like, you don't understand. Anyone, and I don't mean it like that. I guess any personality can do stand up. If you put the time in, you put the writing in, you learn the timing, you can, it's a skill you can learn. You don't have to be a funny person. But then when you go up and you suck, they don't know that. And they just know, oh, yeah, Kevin's not a funny person. You're like, no, you just saw me in a bad show.
Yeah. There's a really great documentary called Dying for Laughs. Not to be confused with the show Dying Up Here, which is a Showtime series, but I've watched this documentary maybe 2 or 3 times.
I have to watch it.
And it's amazing. I mean, it's like they go from the time that you're talking about, like, I think I'm funny, let me go up and do this, to, superstardom with everybody from Jamie Foxx to Kevin Hart to, I don't know, like Joe, you mentioned Joe Rogan, he's in there. Like it's a good mix of individuals, but I think it's the same journey for any career. You can be an accountant and suck on, year one and mess up some numbers and get kicked out of get fired from the job. And if you stick with it, you can eventually have your own, multi-million-dollar accounting firm. Like it's this, again, I guess I keep going back here, but it's that same sort of construct of surviving the downsides of life, or the getting punched in the gut.
That's right. And learning from it.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I took a lot of your time here. I really, really appreciate the talk. A lot of interesting stuff. See, I was telling Eric, I was like, he wanted some notes. I'm like, I can give you some notes, but I don't know if we'll get to anything on here. I hope that's all right. He's like, yeah, that's no problem. It's conversational. But those always make the best shows. Where can folks find you? Where do you want to drive people?
Well, my address is 140.
Yeah. It's like, holy shit, he's really doing it.
Exactly. Oh my gosh. No, so Densonology everywhere. DENSONOLOGY. The study of oneself, I suppose. And yeah, the crush.co is where I kind of house most of my projects. You can find Innovation Crush there. You can see the book, some weird videos that I may or may not have been in. That's the easiest way to do it. And come one, come all. Well, not all.
All right, very cool. And you've inspired me. I'll go back up to an open mic.
The easiest thing you can do. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I don't know if I can take it anymore.
It's hardest and it's the easiest.
Sure. I think maturity plays a lot of role too. Because when I was 21 doing it, I got up there and I was like, man, I'm the funniest guy. I was in Boston. I did it in Boston. That was that's like going to I don't know, Brazil to learn jiu-jitsu. It was a tough town. It was a tough town to learn comedy in. And now I know I'm not funny. I just now I just know, I have to hone this craft. So I don't know, maybe it'll be better. I don't want to tell my wife though. I think that would be akin to, honey, I think we should join Amway. I don't know. I think it would receive the same I don't know, response or something like that. But okay, so well,
I doesn't listen to your show either, which is cool. I could say anything. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to the moon.
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, Chris. Well, I really appreciate your time. If it wasn't folks like you that just take time and speak with us, independent, I guess you could call us journalists. I don't know what we are. Independent entertainers and creators, it'd be nothing. So very much appreciated. I'll put the links to your book and all that on the show notes. And keep in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, no problem. You take care. All right, folks, that's it. Thanks for checking out the Wait What If podcast. We have some cool shows coming up in the next few weeks. I have James Barrett, author of Our Final Invention. He was on last year or 2 years ago, something like that. This guy is one of the best minds out there about artificial intelligence and where our future is going with it. Kind of spooky and will probably scare the shit out of you, so I suggest take a listen. Also, we have Bonnie Mann, former women's boxing champion. She's now a motivational speaker, personal trainer, and all-around inspirational person. So thanks again for checking out the show. Go over to waitwhatif.com and check out chill bios, info, links, whatever. I put a bunch of stuff on there. And I think that's it. See you next time.